Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Tech and Takeout webinar on data security in pandemic times. Joining us today is Amit Ralani, the Director of Solutions and Alliances for Cloudian, and Frank Cheap, Sales Director, U.S. West at Cloudian. Welcome, Amit and Frank. And with that, I'll hand it over to Frank.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jen. I appreciate the introductions. This is Frank Cheap. I'm Director of Sales with Cloudian for U.S. West. I'm joined by Amit, who will be speaking on the second half. I'll be covering 12 slides this morning, and this is my first Bright Talk, so I guess I'm warning the audience. I thought it was video, so I dressed up with a Cloudian shirt and combed my hair and everything, but apparently it was all unnecessary. So with that, this is kind of a standard slide. Data, of course, is everywhere. The message around this is that the sources for data are widespread and multiple. From a use case perspective, we cover a number of different use cases in the unstructured data world. Cloudian basically builds a native S3 platform that will sit within a customer's data center and then offer tiering to public cloud, multiple locations, geo-dispersed, that sort of thing. The growth of data is accelerating. I think we're well over zettabytes globally. A typical enterprise doubles, triples, quadruples, 3 to 4x per year. So there's a couple challenges, certainly managing that growth of the data, but more importantly within this webinar and context is security. As I mentioned, Cloudian has a back-end integration to Amazon, Google, and Microsoft Azure. So we offer the ability to have essentially a private storage cloud within a customer's enterprise and then tier out to public cloud if that customer so desires based on use case, security, data security, or whatever. It's not a requirement, but it is definitely an option, and that option from going public to private or private to public is considered hybrid within our terms. So in terms of security, data protection is an ongoing issue. There have been a number of breaches in the news, most recently. Certainly the internal threat can be multiple. Accidental deletion, which is quite common. Malicious insiders. I'm sure some of you read about Amazon breaches in the last 6 to 12 months. A number of those were actually rogue employees, and that is true for any enterprise. Employee retaliation, which is in the same space, and then evidence tampering in the case of legal discovery and the requirement for immutability, which we'll talk about in just a second. So the other sources of threat are external malware, which has become quite popular. Of course, hackers that have a prestigious ability to break into enterprises, rogue applications, and then finally ransomware, which again we'll cover in just a little bit. So I'm going to let this slide build out. This is just basically illustrating that within the news there's been a number of breaches, ransomware in particular, targeted at labs and hospitals, and certainly there is no compassion for these bad actors. Most recently that we read about was a law firm that handles a lot of media and entertainment sort of stars, and they had a ransomware attack. The ransomware folks asked for a certain number of millions of dollars. The law firm refused, and they increased that number substantially, and they ended up having to pay for it because they had no choice. Why it matters? Maybe this is a bit obvious, but it's certainly the top of mind risk right now from a security standpoint. We have a number of partnerships at Cloudian, and we're seeing lots and lots of interest of data protection around ransomware in particular. It is on the upswing significantly. Half of the companies we have surveyed actually just end up paying the ransomware. The cost to businesses back in 2018 was over $8 billion. and there's an average of $133,000 per ransomware attack. So the part of this is education of users. This is an ongoing sort of process from IT security folks. You know, password protection, making sure people don't click attachments, you know, phishing things. We get emails all the time that look like they're internal Cloudian or Salesforce stamped or something, and we're constantly reminding our employees. In some cases, you can prevent it. In some cases, an employee will unknowingly click something. The idea, though, is to secure your environment through, of course, standard security practice, but above and beyond that, within the enterprise, that you're able to back up the data, which is, you know, a standard feature from a DR data protection standpoint. But more importantly, once the data is backed up, if you're able to offer encryption and protection of that data from a worm, as they say, write once, read many, or immutability, which is another term, so that in the event that the enterprise has been hacked, data is held ransomware or somehow compromised, that the enterprise has the ability to blow away everything and recover a clean copy, if that makes sense to all of you. So with this, as I introduced, there are a couple terms, immutability of a file system and worm storage. Worm storage has been a term used for some time. It is the idea of having a pristine, protected copy of the data that is within normal backup data protection schedules that a company can fail back from in the event that they have been compromised in some way. So this is Cloudian. As I mentioned, we have a on-premise / hybrid S3 compatible object storage. It is very much a start small at less than 100 terabytes and grows to multiple petabytes and exabytes at scale. It's ideal for multiple different use cases in that, of those of you that are familiar with AWS, this is one of their first or second products to market about 7 or 8 years ago. And it is S3 is their service. We use the same native API. So if an application has been developed to work with Amazon, we will guarantee it'll work with us. Use cases are varied. In this tone or this environment, we're talking about security, data protection, ransomware protection. But one has to remember that it is essentially a private cloud. So it is considered multi-tenant. It offers quality services and it can offer multiple both use cases and multiple users and multi-tenant users at the same time, and offer multiple different use cases with a single platform, which is quite attractive. So we sit on the other side of the spectrum, meaning that we are not in the top 20% of high performance, considered mission critical high value data. We sit in the 80% side, which is really the bulk of the data in the world. And as an example, sometimes that split is 20% to 80%. And we're focused on the capacity data, the unstructured data, as we mentioned, with a lot of different use cases. And what we're finding is that as cost of storage increases from a tier 1 high performance storage perspective, customers are wanting to be able to manage those platforms and offload data to us as a lower cost target. So I've hit on this, but I think the point of this slide is that consider it a private cloud. Microservices is a very appropriate term. Use cases are very much horizontal, backup, restore with a number of players, Rubrik, Veritas, Commvault, NetBackup, all sorts of folks. Anybody that has built an S3 connector that will go to an Amazon target, we will support. Development is a second use case, lots of different users for that. Media workflow in the media entertainment space, that industry is pivoting to cloud quite quickly right now. as well as analytics. Many companies are faced with what's considered the data lake challenge. That is, they may sit on petabytes or 100 petabytes of data, and the challenge is how, in fact, you utilize that data and run analytics against those data sets to come up with meaningful applications. So with that, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Amit. I will go back on mute. We certainly appreciate your time today, and please feel free to ask questions throughout this within the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. That was an excellent introduction. And folks, my name is Amit Ravlani. I am Director of Solutions at Cloudian. And what we're going to talk about today is solutions that Cloudian has to offer that cater to the specific security needs of large enterprises. As Frank mentioned, we are an S3 native storage system, which typically, if you look at it, is used to build private clouds within large enterprises. So by that, if you look at the kind of use cases we offer, they are extremely varied. And as Frank touched upon that, data protection is our bread and butter use case. So how do we actually offer security, enhanced security around your data protection, data loss protection use case is one of the topics of this particular talk. In addition, how do we enhance your additional security infrastructure like Splunk, which is one of the most popular SIEM applications that is there today. That's going to be another focus of our solutions talk that I'm going to be walking through in the next few minutes. To start with data protection with Cloudian, specifically around ransomware and data immutability. So as we begin, data protection is our bread and butter use case. Being an S3 compatible or S3 native storage system, Cloudian works with every application that supports S3 APIs. Now, if you look at your traditional and your most popular data backup vendors like Veeam, Rubrik, Veritas, Commvault, they've all embraced S3 as the de facto standard of doing data loss protection for large amounts of data. So if you look at each of these vendors, they have native support of S3, and they have varying degrees of support on each of these protocols. Cloudian acts as a natural backup target to each of these vendors and allows you to create data protection workflows, whether it's a weekly, monthly, yearly, however you want to do it based on the application. And of course, it's all policy-based, and Cloudian can be a seamless backup target for each of these vendors. Now, this particular application, this particular use case would go directly towards the insider threat that we discussed in Frank's section, right? So it just protects you against accidental deletion. It protects you against malicious insiders, not necessarily with privilege, but at least allows you to protect different departments within your segment with copies of data that have been backed up and can be easily recovered in the case of eventuality, right? All of this at 70% the cost of traditional backup appliances, and it's 100 times faster than access to tape, and even with cloud, right? These are on-prem systems, so your RPO and RTO are very, very quick in that sense, right? Now, to add on to that, in our 7.2 release, which came out in December of 2019, Cloudian started giving native support to S3 Object Lock. Now, what is S3 Object Lock? S3 Object Lock is now becoming quickly the de facto standard for S3 object storage systems to implement worm. As Frank mentioned, worm is the terminology. It's an acronym for write once, read many. Now, this is the technology that you would use to make your backup systems immutable or untamperable, right? So this is a tamper-proof way of storing data. What this does is, as your data lands onto the storage system, you can write onto it the first time, but beyond that, it is locked for the duration that you specify, and it is tamper-proof. Even if you actually get a malicious actor coming into your system by a hacking incident or what have you, they will not be able to tamper with your data beyond that, right? How long does this last? Well, that's configurable, and that is configured at the time of creation of the bucket. Now, the lock is applied at the smallest granularity, which in the object storage system is of an object. Why that's done is so that you have granular controls on the data that you are specifying is immutable and cannot be deleted even by privileged users, versus requiring locking of data, all data within, let's say, a bucket granularity or even a higher level granularity. So S3 object lock allows you to get very, very granular and protect the data that really requires protection in the manner that's appropriate. Now, this is becoming a de facto standard because AWS S3 adopted this, and this has been released by AWS about, I want to say, 12 months back. And currently, Cloudian object storage system is the first out of the gate from a on-prem perspective to support this, and we are currently the only one that supports it, specifically with applications on the backup side that also support this. So this is something that's a unique solution currently that's offered in the market. So what are the modes of protection we offer with Object Lock? There are two different modes. There's the governance mode. Now, this is the lesser restrictive mode of data protection with Object Lock. Objects here are locked for a certain period of time, just as we mentioned. However, in this case, you still will have some specific privileged users that will have privileges to modify the data. Now, you might ask, why is the required? Well, this is literally a mode for your DevOps, dev test, DevOps kind of use cases, or use cases where you are trying to protect different departments from each other, but you still want an overarching administrator to be able to unlock the data as required. This would not be the mode that you are looking to protect your data against ransomware, for example. That would be in the compliance mode. The compliance mode is the most stringent data protection mode that you have within Object Lock. In this mode, we will actually disable the root access, and deletes are disallowed for any users, privileged or not. Specifically, this mode is used for regulatory compliance reasons, where you want completely tamper-proof or data immutability for things like ransomware protection, digital evidence management, chain of command kind of use cases that you would want, where it's really, really thoroughly required to be tamper-proof. In compliance mode, even your privileged applications, like, let's say, a backup which has complete privileges to write onto your system, will not be able to delete the data that it actually has written into your systems at that point. So, for example, a Veeam, which also supports S3 Object Lock, if they use Object Lock to write into Cloudian, once it's written, they will lose access to be able to delete data from this locked object as designed. So it is definitely the most stringent mode of data protection there is. And then there's the question, is it enough to have an S3 object lock feature in your storage system to be completely immutable, right? You will see there will be other vendors that do claim some level of immutability or object lock support. It's a software feature, so at some point we do expect other vendors also to start getting this. but it's not really enough to just have a software feature to be completely secure. What happens if a rogue player gets into your enterprise systems, somehow gets root access? I'm not talking about the storage root access, but of the system level root access, and then they can get onto your data at the OS level and potentially even wipe out your entire storage system. The resulting issue is the same as encrypting your data. If they delete your storage system, your S3 object lock is moot. For that specific reason, you have stringent requirements, regulatory requirements that have been put forth by the US government and even in Europe as to what defines a worm storage. So if you look at rule SEC rule 17A4, it specifically requires that when you ship a system in root access in worm mode, root access should be disabled, and you should have certain measures that are inbuilt into your code and your development methodology that need to be followed so that you can be certified as root. Well, Cloudian has spent a good part of the last 2 years and millions of dollars getting certified in not just SEC Rule 17A4, but also FINRA Rule 4511, CFTC Regulation 1.31. All of these going towards specifically certifying that the system is worm-enabled as well as it is a hardened system. In fact, when we ship our systems in the worm mode, we also have secure shell enabled, we have integrated firewall features, and we have access controls that specifically go towards enabling your data protection in a stringent manner, that your data is actually going to be immutable. For that matter, we also require that the customer specifically get a separate worm license, because this mode is definitely stringent and it will protect you against all kind of bad actors, but you should be aware of the impact of locking up your data for the amount of time that you're going to do it. So definitely a very, very hardened system and goes specifically towards the use cases of ransomware compliance and things like evidence management. So how does the workflow look for a use case like this? Well, it's pretty simple. It's pretty much your standard data protection workflow. You will have a backup application like a Veeam, Rubrik, Veritas, or Commvault start your data backup workflow. The slight difference is when it comes to Veeam, they also have native support for S3 object lock. So it is a little more convenient, as in when you actually start the data workflow, backup workflow in Veeam, you get a checkbox which talks about, do you want to make this as an object locked workflow, and what is the duration of time you want to make that workflow immutable. With that, it actually gets inherited within Cloudian automatically, and your data workflow is marked immutable. With the other vendors, you have to actually go into Cloudian, create a bucket which is an immutable bucket at the object level with a duration that you specify. Then you go back into your backup application and you use that object lock bucket as a target, and voila, it's the same. It's pretty much the same thing. Any workflow beyond that is going to be immutable. The data within Cloudian is locked and protected. Now, if you actually get a hacker into your system and they try to hold you up for ransom, guess what? All you have to do is restore a clean copy and try to figure out where the hacker got in and block that particular infiltration. This is also supported with an offsite DR model, so that you have pretty much the holy grail of backups, where you have the 3-2-1 rule, where one is actually having one offsite copy as well. So with an offsite DR, you can checkbox all of the aspects of making sure that your data is completely secure with Cloudian object immutability feature. Next, let's quickly talk about Splunk and how Cloudian enhances your security needs with the solution around Splunk. Now, Cloudian solution around Splunk is all about getting you to do more with Splunk. What does that mean and how does that work? Well, let's get into that right away, right? So Splunk, as most of you are aware, is the leading SIEM security solution used by most of the Fortune 500 companies out there today. Now, this particular solution is used to ingest machine data from various different sources, whether it's your servers, or it's your data center, or it's autonomous cars, drilling oil drill systems, whatever. Splunk connects with hundreds of different various sources and ingests data seamlessly, indexes the data, makes it searchable, and it makes it analyzable to ask various different questions. What are those questions? Those questions are, how do I detect and investigate malware that's attacking me? Similar to what we talked about in the previous example with Veeam, that's the back end of the solution where you actually, the infiltration's already happened. You're trying to protect your data against that. With Splunk, you're trying to go to the front end and trying to detect the infiltration before it happens and trying to stop with that. You want to detect and stop data exfiltration. What that means is with your employees sending your confidential data outside of your system, Splunk will help you try and figure out those kind of scenarios. Privileged user monitoring. Again, it goes to the previous example where you had rogue employees or privileged employees trying to do nefarious acts within your data systems. Detect zero-day attacks, as well as identify patient zero of the malware. Who in your organization is that weak link that let that ransomware attack in, so that you can actually go and educate them or fortify their system so that the next time you will not have those kind of attacks. So Splunk definitely is a very, very, very powerful tool. And no wonder it is one of the most popular SIEM systems out there today. How does the classic Splunk architecture look, right? And it's popular, but how it works is you have Splunk software. Splunk is just licensed by software, right? So you license how much data you want to ingest in a particular day. So you could have 100 terabyte a day license, 100 gigabyte a day license, all the way up to tens of terabytes for the largest enterprise ingesting on a daily basis. Now, this license has to run on indexers, which is a hardware which Splunk does not sell, but you could have a souped-up server that ingests the data. So you have multiple core for the compute. But Splunk also requires some storage on these indexers. Now, these storage are classified within Splunk as hot buckets and warm buckets. This is different from the buckets that we were talking about in the object storage system. So what hot buckets are is, this is the data that's currently being ingested in Splunk, and it's active data. Typically, you can look at it as the first one or 2 days worth of data, and you have to size your indexers for that. And that depends on your ingest rate and how much storage you want to put into your system. And then as the data ages beyond the first day or so, or your hot buckets get filled, you will roll them over to something called warm buckets, which are still on the indexer. And you typically think about this as, let's say, 30, 60, 90 day worth of data. Beyond that, if you are storing data for retention or for regulatory compliance of any kind, you will be rolling them over into something called cold buckets. Now, cold buckets can be JBODs on the same system, or you could even think about this as cheap NAS or some kind of a NAS-SAN system that you would look at storing this data in. Now, the hot buckets and the warm buckets within Splunk, which are on the indexers, are typically on fast disks or even NVMe and flash, and they're extremely expensive. They're also, you would look at having some kind of an RF policy to make sure your data is secure and protected as it gets ingested. So the cost of storage on the indexers is extremely high. The challenges that you face with the classic architecture is it is a Cadillac product and it has Cadillac pricing. Now the Splunk license by itself is costly, but based on what we've seen, customers end up typically spending more than 2x on the Splunk infrastructure, which is on top of the Splunk license, and it is even costlier than that, right? You typically don't mind spending for value, but the infrastructure is beyond the value that you already are getting from Splunk. So you want to reduce that as much as possible and be able to do more with your Splunk instances. Also, processing and storage are now tied to the hip. As you scale your storage system, you have to add more indexers. Whether or not you require the compute capacity, you are adding this irrespective. It also works the other way. If you want to start processing more data, but not necessarily retaining it, you're still going to have to add the same amount of hot and warm buckets and in triplicated typically fashion. So you're really spending a lot of money on storage that you don't need. What happens if an indexer fails? Well, guess what? You had storage on that indexer, so you have to rebuild the storage on the other distributed redundant indexers, and that's going to take time. So having processing and storage tied to the hip is not a good solution. And of course, retention times are going up, whether it is because of you wanting to look at more potential threats, trying to analyze more data, or even for regulatory compliance reasons. Whatever the reason is, you're going to have to spend in the petabytes of range. If you look at the next slide, which I have, it actually shows you a quick eye chart of how this storage need is going to increase as the Splunk infrastructure increases. So if you look at your y-axis from top to bottom, it's the ingest per day. So if you start with a 100 gigabyte license, per day license, or let's just take 1 terabyte a day as an example, right? As you start storing more data for retention, you go from 6 months to a year. As soon as you get beyond 18 months, you're really talking about petabyte. No, sorry, that's on the 5 terabytes side. With 1 terabyte and 4 years of retention, you're getting into almost 700 to 800 terabytes of storage requirement that you will need with Splunk. And as you ingest more data, you will require more storage. It's going to get more and more costly. So what's the solution for this, right? So Cloudian with Splunk has a solution around the new feature that they introduced called SmartStore. What is SmartStore, right? SmartStore is pretty much Splunk's connector for an S3 storage to be able to store everything beyond hot buckets. So warm buckets, cold buckets, whatever kind of buckets you want, you can actually now move them into S3-based storage like Cloudian. The goals of this are to scale the Splunk deployment to meet your needs, right? It is also a goal to minimize data on local storage because of obviously cost reason as well as the data rebuild reasons in case of failure, but doing so while maintaining the fast indexing and search capabilities. Now with an S3-based storage system, S3-based storage system is always going to be online. With HyperStore, you get an online storage that's connected to Splunk, which is going to host all of your warm buckets. The concept of cold buckets is just done away with SmartStore. So you're going to have your indexers hosting your hot buckets, which are typically the first 1 or 2 days worth of data. And then everything is transitioned beyond that onto Cloudian, HyperStore, so that you get a vastly scalable system which is searchable without a performance hit. For doing that, you also have something called a SmartStore cache that Splunk introduced that does intelligent prefetching as well as moving data in and out of Cloudian as required, right? This particular solution decouples your storage and compute layer. It allows you to elastically scale compute on demand for search and indexing workloads. Of course, from a storage growth perspective, that is completely now independent of your compute. So you can scale that to accommodate all of your retention requirements as and when you grow without having to invest in expensive indexer hardware. And of course, going to a storage like Cloudian object storage, you are going to get the benefits of cost savings that Cloudian typically offers. We typically come in at less than the cost of going even to Amazon Cloud in cents or fraction of cents as you grow your capacity. Again, we covered some of these things. So this allows you to do more with Splunk. Again, doing more with the same amount of spend that you had on the Splunk license, but now reducing the cost on the infrastructure tremendously, right? You're liberating your scaling of compute from storage and, of course, lowering your TCO of Splunk solutions. So we also have a white paper that we did on the actual total cost of ownership of Splunk with Cloudian. If you look at this, what we've taken as an example is for a 1 terabyte a day ingest with a retention of 3 years. The bigger the ingest and the longer the retention, the bigger the savings will be for you. If you look at the indexer infrastructure, now because you don't need to randomly add more indexer hardware just so that you can retain more data, you're going to save on the indexer hardware itself. Your processing units itself are going to be about 60-65% of cost savings. On the storage infrastructure side, you're going to eliminate the need for a NAS system for your cold storage, as well as eliminating the need for having expensive warm bucket storage on the indexer. That's going to be a huge reduction in cost for about 80-85%. And if you look at the total cost of ownership, what you don't see in these bar graphs is that your spend on Splunk, your spend on the Splunk software license is the same. We are saying that whatever you invested in Splunk, you keep it at the same, and you're still going to get a 61-62% of overall total cost of ownership reduction with the solution of putting Splunk with Cloudian together. So definitely a huge solution, allows you to do more and get more secure. You can ask more questions with your Splunk investment. You can retain your data longer so that you can analyze. It's now getting to a real big data environment where you can do analysis of data, not just over a period of months, but over a period of years. Everything is searchable, everything is online, and that's where it helps you become more secure in your environment. And then the last one, why customers choose Cloudian? Well, we touched upon some of these things. So highest S3 compatibility is one of the big reasons why Cloudian is chosen by customers. More and more applications are adopting S3. It is the de facto standard of the clouds. Any application that's been written for the cloud will work on Cloudian. Support for File object storage system, starting small and growing with your needs, and granular management. Object lock and immutable storage, we talked about it in the first half of the solution presentation, is a huge leap forward in the security of your data. It is the de facto standard, and currently Cloudian S3 on-prem is the only one that supports this. We are certified by Veeam. If you go to the Veeam Ready certification page, Cloudian is the only one that's listed as Veeam Data Immutability Ready. Hybrid cloud, multi-cloud is another big use case why we get selected by our customers, and of course, data durability and cost. With that, I think I've come to the end of my presentation, and I will turn this over back to Jen.
Thank you, Amit and Frank, and thank you, everyone. Before we begin the Q&A, we will take a quick poll from our audience. As a thank you for attending the webinar today, we will give a $25 gift card to all valid end users with an IT professional title who have watched the webinar live. So if you look at your screen towards the bottom, you can start voting with the poll. Please select from the following which gift card you'd like to receive. And if you're having any issues with the poll, please put a note in the chat box and let us know if you prefer a $25 gift card from DoorDash, Postmates, Uber Eats, or Grubhub. And we will be taking questions immediately following this poll. So if you have any questions, feel free to add them in the Ask a Questions tab at the bottom of your screen. And if you haven't already checked it out, there are some attachments at the bottom of the screen, some solution briefs and videos if you'd like to check those out as well. And with that, we'll start with the Q&A while you guys finish up your poll questions. Amit and Frank, here's a question that came in. Do we need a data moving app to move Splunk data off the indexers and onto Cloudian?
No, that's actually the beauty of the solution. So Splunk SmartStore is pretty much an S3 connector. Splunk is the data mover, and what it does is it intelligently, based on policy and how you've set up your Splunk indexes.conf, will move the data between hot buckets and warm buckets, and will also maintain the SmartStore cache, which I mentioned. Now, the SmartStore cache is actually the real deal here. It does intelligent prefetches of data, so that as you're doing a needle in a haystack search, let's say you have 3 years worth of data that's sitting on Cloudian, and you have a query that you want to run for an IP address that you believe is a potential rogue system. So if you do a needle in a haystack search, your first search hit will take a little while because you're going to go through all of that data that's stored within HyperStore. But once the hit has happened, that data is automatically moved back onto the SmartStore cache, which is on the indexers. And Splunk will also prefetch data before and after that event, so that the subsequent searches, which typically that they've seen is close to your initial hit, will also be moved on to your SmartStore cache. That way, your performance is not impacted. In fact, it's in some cases even faster. So from that perspective, no, you don't need any other data moving mechanism. It's all pre-built within Splunk.
Great. Thank you, Amit. The next question from the audience is, do you support Cohesity as a target?
So I think there's a little bit of confusion here. We are not a data mover ourselves. In fact, Cohesity has a backup data moving application, and we have customers that have used Cloudian HyperStore as a target to Cohesity. So yes, we can work with the Cohesity data moving part of the thing, but as a storage, we don't have any data moving capability to use Cohesity as a target. Frank, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate. We view Cohesity in the realm of Rubric as a backup, restore, active platform, and because Cohesity, along with a number of others, has an S3 enablement on the back end, as Amit said, we can be a target to that. And the question is, why would you want to do that? We're a fraction of the cost of Cohesity, and we could be part of that overall data lake. So, in fact, in the West here, I do have some major customers that are running Cohesity in production. It's been a really good experience.
Great, thanks. We have another question from the audience. Does Cloudian offer full turnkey appliance S3 storage appliance solutions? And does Cloudian offer S3 storage on HPE, Cisco, Dell, or other storage hardware platforms?
Emmett, let me go ahead and take that one. The answer is yes. We have 3 different appliance platforms that are based on industry standard, Intel x86 and Seagate disk drives. We have a 1U and 2 4Us. The larger of the 4U goes up to 1.5 petabytes raw in 4U. We're partnered with Seagate on that platform, and we believe it's the highest density storage array on the market today. On the other end, we start with a 1U 12-by hard drive. It's our partner on that is Quanta, that does lots of business with some of the hyperscalers. So from a use case or a usable capacity standpoint, we can start at a minimum of 96 terabytes and then scale to literally exabyte scale. The other advantage of our platform, which is different than some others, is that you can add nodes to a hot cluster in production. So if you start small, you can actually grow big in a warm, hot environment, which is somewhat different than some of the other folks out there. But really, really good question. The second half of that question is we are software defined. So we are simply an x86 Linux application, and we do support and can run on HPE. We're certified on Cisco CVD, as well as a number of Dell platforms we have certified. We have customers in production on all of those platforms as well. So it really becomes a customer choice of how they want to procure a Cloudian. Good question.
Thanks, Frank. There's one other question that came in. Our organization uses tape for cold data as well as protection against ransomware. How is the solution you talked about different or better?
I can take that, Frank. So yeah, tape has traditionally been one of the means for ransomware protection for customers. I mean, it was more of that was the only way to do a real immutable solution rather than it being an actual good solution. We've seen tapes and the issues that anybody who's worked with tapes knows about the issues, right? So there's the fact that tapes get corrupted, right? You have to check it from time to time to ensure that you actually have your data protected and it's actually accessible still. And then there's obviously the point of accessibility of tape. So if you are attacked, to get to a tape system to retrieve it, it's a very, very cumbersome process. And also, tape versions are changing on a regular basis. You may have backed up your data and protected it a couple of years back, and now you've upgraded to LTFS or LTO 8, and suddenly it's not compatible. So with the tape system, you have to keep making sure that your systems are compatible. In some cases, you may also have to recode the data that you've saved on tapes. Now, Cloudian with an object lock system gives you same or better data immutability with an always online backup copy that can be retrieved in a matter of minutes. I'm not talking about hours or days as you would have with tapes. It's going to be in a matter of minutes. And because it's an always online system, you're not going to have compatibility issues. You're not going to have corruption issues. You're going to have your data secured and saved for the duration that you need it to be. So this is actually a better solution, and definitely something that anybody who's using tapes should start looking at as a better and right approach for protecting against ransomware.
Thanks, Amit. Looks like we have time for one last question here. Object lock addresses data tampering, so won't any intruders that gets into the system still be able to steal the data from HyperStore?
Yeah, right. So that's actually a good question because object lock is data immutability in general is an after the fact protection, right? This is like the worst case scenario where you are trying to protect your business continuity against a hacker that's already within your system, but it's still worm. So it's write once but read many. So if a hacker is within your system, they are still going to have accessibility to read that data. So obviously the solution for that is slightly different, and you have to make sure that you have the security systems in place. From a Cloudian perspective, we do provide extensive security features that make it possible to deploy and operate a cost-effective storage that adheres to stringent security requirements that most of the enterprises have. So it comes down to implementation, but we do support data at rest encryption with AES 256 server-side encryption, so that once your data is stored within Cloudian, it is encrypted. And even if you have a hacker that can read the data without the encryption keys, they will not be able to do anything else. We do support data at flight security with SSL connectivity for all data in transit over HTTPS. And then there's, of course, the secure shell, role-based access controls, as well as audit trail logging. So extensive security features built within Cloudian to address the other side of security that the question just referred to. But specifically, object lock is really for after the fact protection, and that's like your break glass in case of emergency kind of a thing. Because if the hackers can actually also write onto the data, leaking your data or leading your customer information is reputational damage as well as other damage. But locking up your data, encrypting your data, or deleting your data is a huge business continuity risk as well. So two different kind of security concerns, but equally important. And Cloudian does offer solutions for both of those areas. Frank, anything else you want to add?
No, that was a really good, complete answer. And again, the questions have been really good this morning. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you both, Frank and Amit, for answering those questions. So I'd like to thank Amit and Frank for their time today, and to our audience for joining us as well. We hope you are staying safe out there. Take care and have a great day.